Even though Tyler must have missed the call in, I'm still going to go over his hand because I think it really demonstrates something that's very, very important. This was a hand that I think his name was Tyler P. submitted to me last week. So I'm just going to do it. And he was a first-time submitter, so I gave a personalized response. Then I was like, wait a minute, I want to cover this hand. Like, this is crazy. It was a very, very short hand, but I think it's something to be said. So, 5-5, 1K effective. I don't know where it was played out of, okay? But there's a button straddle. And I believe that hero is on the button. So, button straddle and hero straddles. So, it's 5-5-10, right? Hijack limps, cutoff, raises to 40. Now, the hijack here has 1,000, so it's 1,000 effective. Well, we said 1,000 effective, right? So hijack limps, cutoff raises to 40. Hero has jack of spades, jack of diamonds on the button, and 3 bets to 140, which is kind of a little bit on the small. I mean, it's 3x, right? The guy, person like limped in from the hijack. So 3 bets to 140 in this particular spot. And the hijack limp calls. This is very, very important. The hijack calls. And the other guy folds. So we've got a limp call because I've brought so much of this stuff up about what you should pay attention to at the table if you're really unfamiliar with your player. So right away, we are really right off the rails here, right? We've got a limp cold call at a 1K stack in a 3-bet pot, right? 5-5-10. Hijack limps, cutoff raises to 40. Hero has jack, 3 bets to 140 on the button. Hijack calls fold. So we're like right under 300 now. The flop comes out 8 of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds. Hijack checks. Hero bets 140, which is about half the size of the pot. And the hijack calls. So now the pot's probably like 570, and the hijack has like, maybe about 700 left. And again, this is sort of off the rails because you'd be like, oh, is that a board that you want to see bet? And my counter to that would be this guy limp called a 3-bet. I mean, he's just off the rails, right? So pot now is about 570. And start to think about what do they have, right? They could have 8x, they could have diamonds, straight draws, whatever. The turn is the ace of spades. And the hijack checks. And the hero checks behind. Now, it's kind of interesting because this isn't the most interesting part of this hand, but it kind of follows a theme about these hands from, today. Can we again sort of make this sort of variable turn size handcuffing bet here on the turn? I mean, it's a disconnected high card, but an ace is a little bit different than like an offsuit king or an offsuit queen in the sense that you will see ace-x suited represented a lot, like with this type of pre-flop holding. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this guy, this limp caller to 3 bets has like ace-5, ace-6, something like that suited. Ace-x of diamonds now is the nut flush draw that is paired up. So I would still tend to kind of make a little bit of a handcuffing bet here in position if I was the hero of possibly like 150 to 200, something like that to get value from some draws. But it's not surprising that the hero checks behind. So hero checks behind. And now the river is the 3 of hearts. So the board is ace of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, and a 3-bet pot against the limp caller. Hijack checks, hero 140, call. Turns the ace of spades, 8-7-4, ace. Check. The river's the 3 of hearts. And now the hijack jams all in for $720. Over the size of the pot. 720 into about 570. So the pot's right around 1,300. 720 for the hero to call. Now, why do I think this hand is so interesting? And what do I think is the most important part of this hand? Or there's a couple of things, but what would I lean towards? What would I look back at in terms of this overall hand that would lead me to the decision that I'm going to make here? Well, when you're starting to characterize players that you don't know, right? You look for common patterns, inconsistent things that, right off the top are very noticeable. I always say, well, you look for showdowns. You see a guy like limp in from under the gun and he turns over like Jack 4 suited at showdown. You know immediately he's a bad player here, right? Well, here you have a situation that is a very, very polarizing river bet. But if I knew nothing about the guy, I could see that the hijack limp cold called a 3-bet. Limp cold called a 3-bet. What that immediately usually is going to make me think is he's a bad player. This is almost the equivalent is if I saw somebody limp call with Jack 5 suited and that got down to showdown, okay? So that right there. After we see this action and I tag this guy as a bad player, what do I think about this sizing at the end? Bad players that make this type of sizing at the end are immediately polarized, unbelievably polarized. Even if they weren't a bad player, they would be incredibly polarized. And what that means is that, and I don't even know if a limp caller pre-flop from the hijack is taking this type of sizing with aces up. But this is never ace 9 of diamonds going for value. This is like a flopped straight or a set or a busted draw. Like that's the two categories of hands that this guy has. And I always find it really, really interesting if we're playing out of the hero's perspective, when we check back a blank ace, if the guy really did have thick value, you could put yourself in the head of a bad player. You see they tend to over slow play. They're not going to be sophisticated enough to overbet in a spot where the hero might be forced to call down in a certain spot. They're usually looking for trying to get called, and they don't think the hero's strong because he checks back an ace. Okay, so there's that. So not only is it unbelievably polarized, but it would be shocking to me that that category of value portion of my opponent's range would take this type of sizing. I would call here, and I wouldn't think about it twice because of the fact that this guy is representing, like I said, a flop straight or a set. He's never going to have ace-x of diamonds. But the most important part of this whole thing is that there's something very, very simple that you can take away from this, where maybe this is not a call against somebody else if we knew nothing about the guy. The most important part of this decision is the fact that he limp called a 3-bet. I can draw, or I do draw, so much from that limp call that I immediately categorize him as a bad player, just the same as I might categorize somebody who is way off the rails at showdown based upon some sort of pre-flop holding. And that's a common question that I've gotten. How do we figure out how somebody plays? I can never fold here to a limp call to 3-bets the way that this hand went down if a guy is so polarized, especially if he's going to most likely take a value sizing that's a little bit smaller after we have feigned some weakness on the turn. So I told Tyler I would call for those reasons. And he said that he folded. Tyler folded. And the hijack showed Queen of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds for a busted front door flush draw. So, poker's not overly complex. There are many, many things that you can immediately recognize. And that's something that I would spot right away. So I thought that was very, very interesting, and just that little tidbit of information that anybody could gain if they were paying attention to it.